She crouched low in the frostbitten dirt, the weight of silence pressing harder than the cold itself. No one moved. No one breathed too loudly. Every soldier around her had the same look, wide eyes that darted between the ridge line and the captain's empty hands. Orders had been promised, but hesitation stretched into paralysis. Fear fed on delay. And then a crack. One sharp rifle echo ripped through the mountain air. Head snapped toward her, not in anger, not in shock, but in something closer to awe. Because in that single pull of the trigger, she had given them what the captain's voice never could: courage. But why her? Why was the quiet one, the woman who rarely spoke in briefings, who kept her secrets locked behind dark eyes, the one who steadied an entire platoon with a single shot? The truth was more complicated, and she hadn't told them everything, not yet. She had always learned to listen before speaking. As a girl, she used to sit on the farmhouse porch, watching her father oil the same old hunting rifle. He'd tell her things in half sentences, never finishing them, forcing her to discover the weight of silence herself. She never forgot his words the night before he left for his last deployment. Courage isn't loud, sweetheart. It's quiet, it's steady. It shows up when fear takes the microphone. That was the night she stopped being a child. And the night she swore she'd follow him into the same path, even if it meant carrying his ghost through every step of her own. Now, crouched on foreign soil years later, his voice lingered like smoke in her memory. And yet, no one around her knew the real reason she volunteered for this mission. The valley stretched wide before them, a hollow bowl of dust and jagged stone. Somewhere beyond the ridge, enemy scouts waited, patient, hidden, watching. Every man in her unit knew it, though no one admitted it aloud. Their captain's hand trembled against the radio. The hesitation burned. Seconds felt like an eternity. That was when she had seen the silhouette shift across the ridge. She didn't hesitate. One trigger squeeze. The echo rolled down the valley, carrying something more than sound. For the first time that morning, no one's shoulders shook. No one's eyes darted. The silence after her rifle spoke was steadier than the silence before it. Still, fear never vanished. It only waited to be tested again. That night, by the small blue light of a tactical lamp, one of the younger soldiers sat beside her. Private Keller, 19, maybe 20, the kind of boy who still carried his mother's photograph folded twice inside a waterproof sleeve. He leaned close and whispered, "How did you know when to shoot?" She didn't answer right away, because the truth wasn't tactical. It wasn't training manuals or doctrine. It was instinct born from watching her father miss dinner after dinner, sharpening his aim under the fatting sun. Finally she said, "Because I had to." Keller nodded like he understood, but she knew he didn't. Not really. Every mission had two fronts, the one mapped on paper and the one mapped inside each soldier's chest. They had been told to hold the ridge, to push back enemy scouts, to wait for supply lines that might never come. But inside, each of them was fighting something different: regret, exhaustion, fear. And her, she fought against the shadow of a promise. She had told her father's grave that she would not flinch where others froze, that she would not let silence bury courage. It was a promise that cut deeper than any wound. Dawn broke cold and unforgiving. Mist draped the valley, hiding shapes and shadows until the first shots cracked back. This time it wasn't her rifle, it was theirs. Bullets stitched dirt. The squad flattened, hearts racing, breaths jagged. Someone cried out, not in pain but in panic. And in that chaos they all turned again, not to the captain, not to the radio, but to her. She steadied her cheek to the rifle's stock, closed one eye, and exhaled. The world shrank to a single line between her pulse and the target's outline. She squeezed. Another echo rang, and for a heartbeat, even fear seemed to pause. Later, when they moved down the ridge to secure ground, one of the sergeants muttered under his breath, "It's not the captain holding this unit together, it's her." The words weren't meant for her ears, but she heard. And though part of her wanted to deny it, another part, the quiet part shaped by years of promises and grief, carried the weight silently. She didn't crave the role. She didn't want glory. What she wanted was something simpler, harder. for none of them to feel the helplessness she once felt as a child, waiting for a father who would never walk back through the door. War had a way of stripping people down to raw truths. Keller admitted one night, in a whisper only she could hear, that he feared not dying, but living long enough to forget who he was. Another soldier confessed he hadn't spoken to his brother in years, and maybe he never would. Their voices blended into the night air like prayers without temples. She listened, carrying each confession as if they were stones added to her rucksack. Heavier, harder to move, but necessary, because she knew what silence could do when left alone. It devoured. And so, when fear threatened to swallow them at the ridge, she broke that silence with her rifle. Not to kill, not to win, but to remind them all that courage could still echo louder than fear. The mission dragged on, supplies thinned, orders came late. Every step down the valley tasted like exhaustion, yet every time panic flared, her rifle cut through it, until slowly they stopped waiting for orders. They began to move with her silence, her steadiness. And that was the hidden truth she never spoke aloud. Leadership wasn't about rank. It wasn't even about strategy. Sometimes leadership was a single act of defiance against fear. A single shot that told the rest, "You're not alone." By the end, when the extraction finally arrived, no one spoke of the captain's orders. No one remembered the hesitation. What they remembered was the way one echo had given them breath again. She never called it heroism. She never even thought of it as bravery. To her, it was simply honoring a promise she'd made long before the war found her. A promise born on a farmhouse porch, whispered by a father who never came home. As the helicopter lifted them out, wind tearing across tired faces, she stared back at the ridge. The silence there was different now. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't suffocating. It was dignified. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And in that silence, her father's voice lingered one last time. Why was the wind whispering names she couldn't make out? She rose before dawn, her boots echoing hollow on the cold flagstones of the forward camp. The air smelled of metal and ash and something older, fear. Shadowed figures clustered around maps under dim lights. She moved among them, a ghost in olive drab, carrying a small pack and the weight of unasked questions. No one greeted her. She was the silent one. That shift, that distance, she was used to it. Inside, there was a knot tightening in her chest, anxious, vigilant, uncertain. She had shot once already, but this mission was far from over. The ridge still held dangers she couldn't see, paths she hadn't walked, secrets she couldn't yet reveal. As she aligned her gear at the corner table, Private Keller drifted into her periphery. He had the look of a sunrise too early, half-lit, unsettled. He glanced at her, then away, words tangled in his throat. Moments later, the captain called everyone forward. The lamp flickered, sweat gathered in the small of her back. She left the maps, the murmurs, the expectant faces, and stepped into the hush. He spoke with clipped urgency. Intel confirms 2 enemy squads reconnoitering the western ridge. We hold this post until either 0 hour or extraction. No advance unless ordered. No retreat. Her jaw clenched. No advance. No retreat. The cold no pressed harder than any command she'd heard before. She saw the doubt in the faces around her, in sergeants' eyes that flickered toward her, in privates' hands that brushed their weapons. But there was something he didn't say. There was a margin of chaos, an unspoken risk in the darkness beyond the ridge, and she knew the silhouette she glimpsed had not been an accident. She asked quietly enough, more to herself than the captain, "Do we know their watch patterns?" The captain paused, uneasy. "Partial, but there's too much unknown." She nodded. Good. Unknown was her ally sometimes, but only if controlled. That night sleep came in fits and starts. She lay on her cot, the netting above her catching dust, her ears straining beyond the thin fabric. Somewhere a radio cracked, a distant howl, the soft shuffle of boots across hard earth. Between each breath she willed herself calm to steady that knot, the hum in her veins. In the flicker of night, she recalled the farmhouse porch again. She saw her father's hands, rough and steady, brushing spent shells into a tin. He waited for the right moment, always waited. That patience had annoyed her as a kid. Why not shoot sooner, she asked. His answer, because the wrong shot costs more than you imagine. She sensed now what he meant. One wrong shot could shatter a line of trust, or worse, cost lives. And yet, sitting still felt worse. Waiting gave birth to doubt, to fear. She pressed her hand into the cold metal of her side table, grounding herself in the present. By morning, low cloud lay heavy across the valley floor. The ridge appeared as a dark, jagged tooth barely visible in the mist. She strapped on her sniper pack, checked her optics, felt the tension in her limbs tighten. Every joint spoke, alert. She moved to the ridge's forward lip, crawling through low shrubs where dew clung to blades of grass. The cold seeped through her uniform, dampness kissed her cheek. She tasted tension. She breathed silence. She scanned. No movement, except a flicker, a shawl of shadow where no shadow should be. She froze, heart loud in her ears. She inhaled, exhaled, adjusted. The silhouette stretched, then melted back into the terrain. She traced that memory. The one from yesterday, the shifting silhouette, the crack of her shot. That moment replayed with slight variations in her mind. She knew she must be patient. Known. Back at the command post, Keller approached her, voice small. "Ma'am, they found a foothold at the lower pass. Scouts confirmed it minutes ago." She nodded, tight-lipped. Foot traffic, enemy mobility. That pass allowed infiltration, flank attacks. The ridge wouldn't hold long. She felt their anxiety as if it were her own breath. "Any orders?" he asked. She shook her head. The captain hadn't said. The silence in his voice when she asked earlier still haunted her. They gathered in the dim room, the map spread like ghosts. The captain's face was drawn. Plots crisscrossed the valley. Lines of supply, lines of communication, all vulnerable. "Any questions?" the captain said. Eyes flickered to hers. She did not flinch. She asked, "Is there an alternate exfil route if we lose the ridge?" He swallowed. "We've scouted a path through the ravine, but it's narrow and exposed. Not ideal." She forced her voice steady. "If we link that path now, they won't expect it at 0 hour. We could use it as redundancy." The captain's eyes narrowed. He weighed. The room grew silent. She felt the tension in her bones. "Then do it," he said. That sentence shifted everything. Her throat went dry. She stared at the map, at the path through steep stone. The risk was high. The reward, survival, was higher. They moved under a half-moon. She led a small team, Keller in tow, the sergeant behind. The ravine yawed open before them, rock walls steep, shadows long. The path twisted, narrow ledges, loose stones that threatened to give way. The faint sound of wind, but no footsteps, no sentries, yet. She stopped at each turn, scanning, listening. The night swallowed sound. She tasted adrenaline. Keller's breath came quick. She caught his eye, whispered, "Stay close, watch the wall." He nodded, face pale but steady. They reached a stretch where the ravine narrowed to a hairline. She pressed her palm against rock, felt the stones, cold sweat under her glove. One slip, death or capture. She moved slowly, every footstep a promise made. From above came a soft scrape, a rock shifting, slow, inevitable. She froze. One soldier behind her stumbled. The noise echoed. Her heart thundered. She swiveled her rifle, finger on trigger. The darkness held its breath. Nothing, no figure, no shot. Just a bird, wings flapping, startled. The moment cracked and they moved again. They reached a hidden opening in the rock face, a narrow cleft leading upward. It was a path not mapped. It snuck behind the ridge, a ghost staircase. She guided them silently, one by one, through that cleft. The climb was jagged, vertical edges biting gloves, ankles burning. Mist swirled below them. Finally they emerged behind the ridge, hidden from the valley. She exhaled but didn't relax. The silence here felt hollow, waiting. She motioned to the sergeant, "Place the beacon, survey." She raised her head, peered over. The enemy scouts patrolled the outer cusp. They were distracted, shifting, scanning, restless. Her heart pounded, but she steadied the storm inside. Her team set up observation post. She passed out assignments quietly, gestures, nods. Keller took the flank side, she took the center. The sergeant covered the rear. Suddenly, beyond the ridge's lip, she heard a click, a rifle bolt. Her rifle's scope found crosshairs momentarily, a sniper upstream, eyes glinting. Their eyes locked for a heartbeat. Then the shooter ducked. The shot never came. She froze, then whispered, "They know we're here." Hours crawled. Scout teams passed in and out of vision, the enemy probed. She held her breath each time. She monitored them through the scope, tracing movement, noting patterns, rhythms. Each time a scout passed, she thought of Keller's face, young, hopeful, fragile. She couldn't lose him, couldn't lose any of them. She replayed her father's lesson again that night on the porch. Don't rush your shot. Respect the pause. It holds more power. In the quiet moments, guilt crept into her. She carried burdens others didn't see. The memory of a brother she lost, the promise she made to her father, the scars she pretended weren't there. Sometimes she wondered whether leading each mission was a form of penance, whether the ghost in her chest would ever rest. The captain's voice crackled over the radio. Hold position. Wait for 0 hour. Reinforcements delayed. She clenched her teeth, her knuckles whitened. Delay again, her uncertainty roared. She swallowed it. She steadied her voice. She broadcast back, copy holding. She shut off the radio, the silence pressed. Beneath it, something pulsed, dread. Suddenly, Keller's voice clipped whisper. Ma'am, movement at grid Delta 5. She swung the scope, 2 figures crawling along the ridge's far edge. They paused. One raised a radio, signals. She traced the line of sight. They were relaying coordinates, reinforcements. She caught the sergeant's eye. He nodded. Time crystallized. She exhaled a breath she didn't know she held. Then slowly she traced her finger on the radio channel. She considered her options. She could strike now, disrupt the relay. But then the scouts would know they were here, full broadcast, full assault. Or she could wait, risk the enemy's full strength passing. She chose disruption. She whispered, Keller, flank right. Sergeant, cover that angle, I'll take the relay. They moved silent, deliberate. She edged forward along the concealed flank, scope up, pulse quiet. She saw the scout with the radio, proud and certain, unaware. Her finger curled on the trigger. A bead of sweat traced her temple. She pulled. Echo sharp, cutting. The scout slumped. The radio hissed, gone. The second crouched, startled, turned. She fired again. He fell. The relay was silenced. She dropped the scope and sprinted back. Sergeant and Keller met her halfway. The horizon flared. Enemy reinforcements responded. Shots cracked. The ridge line tore open. The attack came hard and fast. She adjusted, directed, observed. She fired when she must, held fire when she must. The ravine flank they'd secured became vital. Reinforcements poured in through gaps. Her team fought to block them. The night roared in. Thunder or shells, she couldn't tell. She felt the ground shake beneath boots and explosions. She held her post. She watched shadows twist. She remembered the promise. She would not flinch where others froze. One by one, enemy combatants fell, retreated, vanished. At last the ridge held, exhausted, bleeding, but alive. In the aftermath, Keller came to her side, eyes wide. He asked, trembling, "How did you see them first, always?" She offered a small, sad smile. She didn't answer, because words weren't enough. She just nodded. Later in the dim post, she cleaned her scope, hands shaking. The sergeant sat nearby, cleaning tools. He looked at her, tired. "You saved us tonight," he said. She looked away. Pride felt foreign. "I only did what needed doing." He sighed. Sometimes what needs doing becomes more than survival. It becomes meaning. She kept her silence. Because he was right that night, the ridge meant more than survival. It meant that fear needn't own them. It meant hope could begin in the echo of a rifle. Outside, mist crept over the ridge. The wind was soft now. She sat against a wall, legs drawn in, hands still buzzing. She closed her eyes. In the dark, she heard her father's voice again. Quiet courage shows up when fear takes the microphone. Her lips curved in a wry twist. She didn't feel whole, but she felt closer to something she had lost trust, with her squad and with herself. The night deepened, patrols murmured, the ridge breathed. And she waited. In the hush, she vowed, no matter what came next, she would not let them wait in fear again. She would remain the echo. Why did the ridge feel heavier the next morning, as if stone itself carried the memory of blood? The dawn came gray, without color. The mist from the valley still lingered, clinging low to the jagged terrain, mooting the horizon. Soldiers stirred in the camp behind her, their boots crunching against gravel, their breath steaming in the cold. Some muttered half-jokes over ration packs, their voices thin, forced, fragile. But most stayed silent, eyes darting to the ridge as though it might move, as though the rock itself were waiting to betray them. She sat alone at the edge of camp, rifle across her knees, cleaning cloth dragging slow circles across the barrel. Her motions were steady, almost ritualistic. Each wipe carried away more than dirt. It carried away fear, doubt, hesitation. The rifle was an anchor, her truth, her silence, her answer. Yet even as she worked, her hands trembled faintly. She flexed her fingers to hide it. The sergeant approached, boots scuffing. He lowered himself to the dirt beside her. His face was tired, his beard rough, his eyes older than the lines in his skin. He lit a cigarette, let the smoke curl in the air, and said nothing. She didn't look at him, but she didn't move away either. Finally he spoke. "They'll follow you now, you know that, don't you?" Her cloth stilled on the barrel. She said nothing. "Don't matter what the captain says. Last night proved it. The ridge held because of you. You're the one they'll look to when it matters." She let out a long breath, more sigh than answer. "I never asked for that." He shrugged, smoke trailing. "No one ever does." The silence stretched. He flicked ash, glanced at her, then away. "You carry something, don't you? Something heavier than a rifle." Her jaw tightened. She didn't answer, because if she did, the truth might spill out. The farmhouse porch, her father's last words, the folded flag pressed into her mother's shaking hands. The promise she made to a grave. No, she couldn't let that surface here, not with him, not yet. She stood, slinging the rifle. "We should check the western slope." He didn't press. He just nodded, stubbed out the cigarette, and followed. The slope was quiet, too quiet. The mist clung thicker here, swallowing sound, mooting vision. Every footstep seemed swallowed before it could echo. She crouched low, scanning through her scope, tracing the horizon. At first nothing, just the gray wash of morning, the jagged black lines of stone. Then a flicker, a glint of glass far out on the ridge. Her pulse quickened. Sniper scope. She pressed deeper into the dirt, her breath slowing, chest flattening against cold rock. She whispered into the radio, "Sniper bearing 217, high ground." Static crackled. The captain's voice came back, "Hold position, don't engage." Her teeth clenched. "Don't engage," easy words from behind maps and static. She watched the glint shift, vanish, reappear. The sniper was patient, waiting, watching, just like she was. Keller's voice whispered from her flank, "Do you see him?" "Yes." "Orders." She hesitated. Her finger brushed the trigger guard, her heart steadying into the familiar rhythm of choice. Orders said wait. Her gut said act. Her father's voice whispered through memory, "The wrong shot costs more than you imagine." But so does no shot at all. She exhaled slow. The world narrowed, the mist blurred. Only the scope remained sharp. She steadied, adjusted for wind, for distance, for breath. She squeezed. The echo cracked across the ridge, loud, defiant. Silence followed. No return shot, just the hush of mist rolling heavier, as though the valley itself held its breath. Keller's voice low, "Did you get him?" She lowered the rifle, eyes still fixed on the horizon. "We'll know soon enough." The enemy didn't strike immediately. Hours passed, slow and tense, soldiers restless and whispering. Some played cards with shaking hands, others cleaned weapons they'd already cleaned twice. Fear lingered in their movements, quiet but constant. That evening, as rations were passed around, Keller sat beside her again. He toyed with the edge of his spoon, not eating. His voice was small. "Do you ever wonder if it's worth it?" She looked at him, studying the lines of his face, the boy still half buried beneath the uniform. "Worth what?" "All of it, us being here, fighting people we don't even know, holding a ridge that doesn't belong to us. Do you ever think maybe none of it matters?" His words cut sharper than he intended, because she had asked herself the same question, night after night, on too many deployments, and every time the only answer she found was silence. She let the spoon slip from her fingers, her food untouched. "It matters to someone," she said finally. He frowned. "Who?" She swallowed hard. "The ones waiting for us to come home." He stared at her, searching her face, maybe sensing the crack in her voice, the unspoken ache beneath her words. But he didn't push. He just nodded, quiet, and finally ate. At midnight the attack came. The first explosion tore through the camp's eastern wall, dirt and fire spraying. Shouts erupted, soldiers scrambling, rifles raised. The air filled with smoke, with screams, with chaos. She dropped flat, rifle to shoulder, scanning through the haze. Shadows moved fast, enemy silhouettes flooding through the breach. Muzzle flashes lit the night. Her heart pounded, but her hand stayed steady. She fired. 1, 2, 3. Each shot an anchor, each echo carving a path through fear. Keller ducked beside her, firing bursts from his rifle, his face pale and tight. "They're everywhere." "Hold the line," she snapped, her voice sharper than she felt. Inside, terror clawed, but she buried it deep. Fear wasn't allowed, not now. The sergeant barked orders, dragging soldiers into position. The captain shouted into the radio, voice cracking, begging for reinforcements that wouldn't come. She saw it then, the sniper she thought she'd silenced. He was alive, perched high, scope aimed. Her chest went cold. She shifted, sighting him, too far, too fast. She fired anyway, misfired again. He vanished into the smoke. Her pulse roared, she failed, and that failure had a cost. A scream ripped through the night. One of theirs. She spun, eyes wide, but it was too late. A young private lay still, rifle slack in his hands. Guilt crashed into her, heavy, suffocating. She pressed it down, forced her eyes back to the scope. She couldn't grieve, not now, not yet. The fight dragged on. Minutes stretched into an eternity of smoke and fire and echoes. Her rifle never cooled, her body numb with recoil. She forgot hunger, forgot fear, forgot everything except the rhythm. Spot, breathe, fire. Again. Again. When at last the enemy retreated, melting back into the mist, the ridge was broken. Smoke clung to the ground. Bodies lay still, friend and foe alike. The silence afterward was worse than the chaos before. She lowered her rifle, her hands shaking uncontrollably now that it was over. She stared at the young private's body, his face slack, his dog tags catching the faint light. She had never even learned his first name. Keller stood beside her, his rifle hanging loose, his eyes wide and wet. "We held," he whispered, as if trying to convince himself. She nodded, throat tight, words caught somewhere she couldn't reach. But inside she knew the truth. They hadn't just held, they had bled, and tomorrow they would bleed again. That night, as the others slept in scattered exhaustion, she sat awake at the edge of the camp, her rifle across her knees. The stars were faint behind the smoke. The ridge loomed dark and silent. She thought of her father again, of his last words, of the promise she had made. "Courage isn't loud," he'd said, but tonight courage had been deafening, and still it hadn't been enough to save them all. She closed her eyes, breath shaking. A tear slipped down, but she wiped it away quickly, fiercely, as though it betrayed her. In the silence, she whispered to the night, to herself, to the ghost she carried, "I won't let them break." Her voice was steady, quiet, almost lost to the wind. But it was a vow. Why did the ridge fall silent just before dawn? The men swore they heard nothing, but she did. A shift in the air, faint, like fabric brushing against stone. She froze, eyes narrowing, the rifle balanced steady against her shoulder. The world seemed to wait with her. Then there it was again. A whisper carried by the cold wind, not words but movement. Someone out there was closing in. Her finger rested on the trigger, but she didn't fire. Not yet. Timing was everything. One wrong shot and the ridge would light up like a funeral pyre. She glanced at the squad. They slept in broken circles, rifles propped against rocks, eyes hollow from days without real rest. Courage had come when her rifle cracked the night before, but courage fades fast when the waiting drags on. They were slipping back into fear. She couldn't let them. She crawled along the rocks, boots scraping just enough to remind her of home. It was the sound of gravel under the porch steps back in West Virginia, where her father used to sit in silence, waiting for news from the front lines decades earlier. He never spoke about his own fear, but she could see it in the way he folded his hands, knuckles white. Now she carried that silence inside her, shaping it into something else: resolve. When she reached the edge of the ridge, the valley stretched wide below. The fog moved like a living thing, curling around the shapes of trees, broken buildings, and shadows that refused to stay still. She held her breath. One shadow detached itself from the rest, then another. She counted 4, then 6. More were waiting. Her chest tightened. Reinforcements weren't supposed to arrive for another 48 hours. That left them alone, outnumbered, exposed. She considered waking the squad, but hesitation clawed at her chest. If she woke them now, panic would ripple through the ridge like wildfire. They'd seen enough death already: 2 men taken out by artillery the first night, another by shrapnel that left him crying out for his mother until the medic pressed morphine into his veins. She knew the look in the others' eyes. They were waiting for something to give them courage again. But courage couldn't be forced. It had to be delivered. Her hand slid across the bolt of her rifle. She could end this waiting with one echo, but that would reveal her position. She pictured her mother's face, the one she hadn't seen in years, lips pressed tight in prayer. Then her brother, still just a boy when she left, asking her why she wanted to fight when she could have stayed safe. She had no good answer then. Now, watching shadows climb toward the ridge, she knew, because someone had to. She lined up her scope. The crosshairs settled on the first shadow. Her heart slowed. In those seconds nothing else existed, just her breath steady, the cold press of metal against her cheek. The world narrowed into one decision. She squeezed. The shot broke the silence. The echo rolled across the valley, bouncing from ridge to ridge like thunder, announcing itself with certainty. The squad jerked awake, eyes wide, hands scrambling for weapons. Fear flooded them, yes, but also recognition. That sound again. The sound that had steadied them once already. The first shadow collapsed. The others scattered, stumbling back into fog. Her squad pressed to the rocks, rifles aimed, waiting for orders. She gave none, not yet. Let the silence stretch. Let the echo settle into their bones. Then she whispered, calm, sharp enough to cut through panic, "Hold, wait." The men froze, but they listened. And in that moment, something shifted. They weren't waiting in fear anymore. They were waiting because she told them to. Minutes passed. No more movement in the valley. The fog thickened, swallowing shapes, swallowing threats. She pulled back, crawling into the circle of men who watched her like she carried more than a rifle, like she carried the answer to whether they'd survive the night. A young private spoke first, voice shaking. How do you know when to shoot?" She met his eyes. He couldn't be older than 19, barely grown. She remembered the boy she once loved back home who asked her that same question at the range behind her father's barn. She hadn't answered him then. She hadn't known. Now she did. "When it matters," she said softly, "not before." The words landed heavy. The private nodded as though they were orders carved into stone. The others looked down, adjusting straps, cleaning rifles, checking ammo. Rituals that gave them control. Small things, but they mattered. The hours dragged toward dawn. Hunger gnawed at their stomachs, but no one asked for food. They were listening. To her. To the silence after her rifle's echo. to the way she carried herself like the ridge belonged to her, not the shadows below. Still, when her eyes closed for a moment, memories pried their way in. The funeral flag folded too tightly. The letter from command that said killed in action but never said where. Her father's silence. She had carried those things like stones in her chest. Now here, she wasn't sure if she was carrying them or if they were carrying her. Dawn broke slow, painting the fog with pale light. The squad stirred. Some stretched stiff limbs, some muttered curses about rations, but all of them watched her, waiting for a signal even in small things. She gave none, not yet. Instead, she studied the valley again. It seemed quiet, but she didn't trust quiet. Not anymore. Something still lingered down there, hidden in fog, waiting. She felt it in her bones, the same way she had felt the first shadow move before anyone else. And she knew the waiting wasn't over. What made the dawn feel heavier than the night before? The light was supposed to bring relief, but as the sun dragged itself over the ridge, every shadow grew sharper, every breath louder, every silence more dangerous. She stood at the edge of the rocks, scanning the valley through her scope. Nothing moved. Not yet. And that was the problem. Her squad shifted restlessly behind her. They trusted her, yes, but trust wasn't the same as certainty. One wrong decision could unravel everything. She heard them muttering low, the way soldiers mutter when they're trying to sound braver than they feel. A joke about rations, a complaint about the cold, the scrape of metal on stone as someone checked their magazine again. Small sounds, but beneath them she could hear it, their fear. She knew fear, not as an enemy but as a companion. It had sat beside her since her first deployment, whispering into her ear when the night stretched too long. She had learned not to silence it but to live with it. Fear kept you awake. Fear made you careful. Fear reminded you what was at stake. The young private, the one who had asked her about knowing when to shoot, sat closest to her now. He didn't speak. He just stared at her hands, steady on the rifle, like if he studied them long enough, he might learn something. She thought of her younger brother again. His hands had once gripped hers the same way when she shipped out, as though he could hold her back from going. But she had gone, and now, standing on this ridge, she wondered if he would ever understand why. The fog below began to thin as the sun burned higher. The valley revealed itself inch by inch, broken trees, rusted wire, the skeletons of buildings long destroyed. Then she saw it. A flicker of light, just for a second, glass reflecting sun, a scope. Her body froze, then moved on instinct. She ducked low, pressing her back against stone. A bullet snapped overhead, striking sparks off the ridge. The squad dropped instantly, curses spilling from their lips. The private scrambled, eyes wide. "Sniper," she hissed, though they already knew. Her pulse hammered in her throat, but her mind stayed sharp. If there was one, there were more. The shadows she had seen in the fog last night weren't scouts, they were positioning, waiting for this. Another shot cracked. Stone splintered inches from her head. She closed her eyes, forcing her breath steady. Fear was here. Good. Fear would keep her alive. "Positions," she ordered. Her voice was calm. She needed it to be. The squad obeyed, sliding into cover, rifles angled toward the valley. But cover only bought time. They couldn't stay pinned forever. Her scope swept the valley. Nothing. Whoever fired was well hidden. She knew the game, sniper against sniper, was patience against patience. But she didn't have the luxury of waiting them out. The squad needed her to act. Again. She thought of her father sitting in silence on that porch. He had once told her the hardest part of war wasn't pulling the trigger. It was deciding when not to. She hadn't understood then. She did now. A third shot rang out, closer this time. The private flinched hard, nearly firing into the valley. She reached out, steadying his rifle with one hand. His breath came in ragged bursts. She leaned close, whispering so only he could hear. "Breathe, don't let them rush you." His eyes darted to hers. He nodded, though his shoulders still trembled. She gave him a small, almost invisible smile. Not comfort, not really, just a reminder. They were still here, still fighting. She turned back to her scope, waited. The fog shifted again, curling like smoke. Then there, a faint outline on a rooftop ruin, barely visible but enough. She exhaled, slow, letting the world narrow. One breath, one shot. Her rifle cracked. The echo tore across the valley. A figure slumped. Silence followed, deep and heavy. But it wasn't over. She felt it immediately. The tension didn't break, it tightened. More shadows stirred below, movement in the ruins. They weren't retreating, they were advancing. Boots pounded stone. Shouts echoed faintly through the valley, carried by the wind. Her squad cursed, fear rising fast. She could feel it spreading like wildfire. She pressed her back to the rock, closing her eyes. She wanted to believe reinforcements would come. That command hadn't forgotten them, but deep down she knew the truth. They were alone. A memory cut through her chest, her brother, younger, sitting on the porch steps, asking, "What if you don't come back?" She had laughed then, brushed it off. But she hadn't answered him. Maybe because she didn't know how. Maybe because she feared the answer more than he did. She opened her eyes. The men were watching her again. Waiting. Fear in their eyes, yes, but something else too. A question, not about survival but about courage. She rose slowly, rifle cradled against her chest. Her voice was steady, even as her heart pounded. "They're coming, we hold them here." The private swallowed hard, but how long? She met his gaze. "As long as it takes." The words weren't a promise of survival, they weren't hope, they were truth, and somehow that was enough. The first figures broke through the fog, sprinting toward cover below. Rifles lifted, muzzles flashed, the ridge erupted in fire and thunder. She dropped behind stone, reloading, the heat of spent casings brushing her arm. Her squad fought hard, their fear drowned out by survival. Yet even through the chaos they glanced her way, listening for her, watching her. Her rifle cracked again, another figure falling. The echo rolled across the valley, and for a moment, just a moment, it felt like courage again. But deep inside, she knew, the battle was only beginning, and the ridge would demand more from her than a steady hand. It would demand everything she had left to give. What does courage sound like when it's drowned in gunfire? To most, it's noise, chaos, metal clashing with earth, men shouting, rifles cracking until the air itself feels torn apart. But to her, courage had a sound. It was the click of a magazine locking in place, the steady exhale before a shot, the voice that didn't break even when fear tried to rip it apart. She listened for those sounds now, clinging to them as the ridge shook under the assault. The enemy pushed harder, shadows breaking from the fog in bursts of speed. She saw them ducking into ruins, sliding behind twisted trunks, their rifles flashing. Each movement sharpened her focus. Every second she stayed alive wasn't hers alone. It was borrowed time she had to give back to the squad. The private fought closest to her, his hands trembling but his shots finding their mark. He looked to her often, as though her presence anchored him in the chaos. A round snapped past his head, close enough to clip his helmet. He dropped flat, panic flashing in his eyes. She pressed her hand against his shoulder, forcing him to look at her. "Steady," she said, firm but low, as bullets cracked above them. "They miss more when you don't." He blinked, swallowed, then nodded. And somehow he rose back into firing position. That was courage too. Not the kind sung about in songs, but the kind lived in silence, hidden in small choices. A grenade arced through the air, landing just short of their cover. She saw it before the others did. Time slowed. The sound of metal against stone, the hiss of burning fuse. She grabbed the private's collar, dragging him hard against the ground. The explosion ripped earth from beneath them, throwing dirt and stone into the air. Her ears rang, sharp and punishing. She couldn't hear the shouts, but she felt them, men screaming, cursing, firing blind. She rolled, coughing dust from her throat, scanning for survivors. Most of the squad was still firing. Two were down, one clutching his leg, blood dark against his fatigues. The medic crawled through the chaos, dragging him behind cover. No one hesitated, not even the wounded. They all fought to stay alive because she was still fighting. Her scope found a figure in the valley, shouting orders, waving others forward. A leader. She knew the kind. Kill one and the rest hesitate. Her breath steadied, finger pressing the trigger. Then she stopped. Not because she missed, but because the figure dropped suddenly, tackled by another soldier she hadn't seen. Two enemies, moving fast, smarter than she expected. They weren't just charging, they were learning. Her chest tightened. They were pinned, outnumbered, and the enemy was adapting. Reinforcements weren't coming. Not today, maybe not at all. She forced the thought back. She couldn't let the men see doubt in her eyes. The ridge shook again under fire. A corporal beside her leaned close, shouting through the ringing in her ears. "We can't hold this forever." She glanced at him, then back to the valley. "We don't need forever," she said. "We need long enough." He didn't argue. He just nodded, jaw tight, and kept firing. Long enough. The words echoed in her head. Long enough for what? For who? Her brother's face returned in flashes. His voice, "What if you don't come back?" She had no answer then. Maybe this was the answer. Not coming back, but holding long enough that others could. The enemy pressed harder. Bullets chewed into stone, spraying shards into her face. She tasted blood on her lip, wiped it with the back of her hand, and kept her eye on the scope. Another figure broke cover. She fired. One less. The echo roared back across the valley, thunder in their bones. The private shouted beside her, "You think we'll make it out?" His voice cracked, raw. She didn't answer right away. Not because she didn't know, but because honesty mattered more than comfort. She turned to him, dust clinging to her hair, eyes burning but steady. "We'll make it matter," she said. He froze at that, then nodded, jaw set. He lifted his rifle again with a steadiness she hadn't seen in him before. That was all she needed. The ridge became a rhythm. Fire, reload, fire, duck. The air was smoke and dust, burning lungs with every breath. Shadows fell below, some retreating, some advancing. It was endless, and yet every second stretched like eternity. Then silence, sudden, heavy. She froze, fingers still on the trigger. No shots, no shouts. The fog below swirled thicker, swallowing the valley again. Her squad looked at her, fear pressing in through the silence. Why had they stopped? Her pulse hammered. She scanned the valley, every nerve screaming. The quiet wasn't relief, it was a question, a warning. The corporal whispered, "What are they waiting for?" She didn't answer, because deep down she already knew. Something worse was coming. And the ridge wasn't done testing them yet. Why would the enemy stop when they had them pinned? That question pulsed in her skull like a second heartbeat. The ridge was too quiet now, too still. Silence after battle wasn't mercy, it was calculation. She pressed her cheek against the rifle stock, scanning through the fatting fog, but the valley betrayed nothing. Just broken stone, rusted wire, and the weight of something unseen. The squad shifted nervously. Fingers tapped on rifle barrels, teeth clenched. They were waiting for her to say something, anything, to tell them how to survive the silence. She remembered her father again, how he used to wait out storms on the porch, never moving, never flinching, as if silence itself were part of survival. She inhaled slow, steady, letting them see calm where she only felt fire. "Eyes open," she whispered. "They're not done." The private closest to her swallowed, his lips pale. "Then what are they waiting for?" She didn't answer, because the truth sat heavy in her chest. They weren't waiting for daylight. They weren't waiting for reinforcements. They were waiting for her squad to break first. The fog thinned with the rising sun, stretching shadows long across the valley. That was when she saw it, movement, not fast, not reckless, calculated. A dozen figures advancing low, spreading wide, flanking toward the ridge. Behind them more, not rushing this time, not reckless, advancing with precision. Her gut twisted. These weren't the same fighters they'd held off before. These were trained, experienced, and they weren't coming to test the ridge. They were coming to take it. She raised her rifle, steady hands masking the tremor inside her chest. One breath, one shot. The crack split the air, echoing across the valley. One figure dropped. The others didn't scatter this time. They kept coming. Her squad opened fire, the ridge erupting once more. Bullets carved into stone, smoke burned their throats. But for every shadow that fell, two more pressed forward. The medic shouted for cover, dragging another wounded man back. The corporal cursed under his breath, firing until the barrel steamed. Her heart hammered, not from fear of dying, but from the weight pressing down on her chest. They couldn't hold forever, and yet the men kept looking to her, as if her rifle could rewrite the ending. Another explosion tore the ridge, dirt and rock raining down. She hit the ground hard, ears ringing, vision swimming. For a moment the war blurred into something else, her brother's face, the letter folded in her father's lap, her mother's voice whispering prayers into the night. Then the present slammed back. The private was beside her, shouting words she couldn't hear, shaking her shoulder. His fear wasn't for himself. It was for her. She pushed herself up, blood stinging her lip, eyes sharp again. She couldn't let them see her fall. Not here, not now. "Hold," she barked, voice cutting through the smoke. "Keep them back." And somehow they did. Not perfectly, not cleanly, but with grit, with desperation, with something that felt dangerously close to belief. Her rifle cracked again, the echo rolling like thunder. And in that echo she felt it. The ridge wasn't just stone. It was memory, it was sacrifice. It was every soldier who had ever held ground so others could live. She wasn't alone, not really. Then the enemy shifted. She saw it. A flare shot high into the sky, red against the pale dawn, and from the ruins below the shape of something larger, heavier. Not infantry this time, machinery. Her breath caught. The men saw it too. Fear clawed their faces. "What do we do?" the corporal demanded, panic breaking through his voice. She didn't answer right away. She looked at them, the private, still trembling but holding steady, the medic, hands bloody but eyes hard, the others, waiting for her voice to turn the impossible into something survivable. She thought of her brother again, asking why she left, why she fought. She thought of the porch, of her father's silence, of her mother's prayers, and she knew the answer now. Not to win, not to live forever, but to stand, to deliver courage across the ridge until the last echo faded. Her jaw tightened. She chambered around, eyes locked on the valley. "We make them earn every step," she said. And as the ridge thundered once more, the men around her lifted their rifles, not because they believed they would all survive, but because they believed in her. The battle wasn't over, it was only sharpening. Why does the last stand feel different from every fight before it? Maybe it's the silence between volleys, stretched too thin. Maybe it's the way every man glances at one another like they're memorizing faces. Or maybe it's because deep down, they all know the ridge isn't just rock anymore. It's the line between being remembered and being erased. The flare's red glow still hung in the sky, bleeding against dawn. Below, the sound of machinery churned, tracks grinding against stone, metal clanking. The enemy wasn't rushing this time. They were rolling in heavy. She crouched low, rifle across her knees. Dust clung to her hair, blood streaked her cheek, but her hands stayed steady. The private watched her, pale and wide-eyed. He wasn't asking if they'd survive anymore. He was asking something quieter. "How do I die without breaking?" She looked at him and for a moment saw her brother instead. The boy who once begged her not to leave, who asked what courage looked like. Maybe this was the answer. Not medals, not flags, just this. Sitting in the dirt with others, holding ground long after hope should have left. The first rumble shook the ridge. Then another. Metal forms emerged through the fog, armored beasts grinding forward. Infantry swarmed at their flanks, rifles raised, voices sharp. Her squad broke into shouting, curses, prayers, questions. The medic tightened a tourniquet on the wounded man's leg with hands that didn't stop shaking. The corporal spat into the dirt, muttering about odds. She lifted her rifle, eyes forward. Her voice snapped them all into silence. The first armored vehicle stopped short of the ridge, its turret angling up. She knew what came next. Her stomach clenched, but her voice stayed steady. "Down!" The shell tore into the rocks, fire and dust exploding around them. The blast threw her sideways, ears ringing, chest burning. She coughed hard, lungs screaming, but forced herself back up. Around her, men groaned, some bloody, some stunned. The private was beside her again, clutching his rifle like it was all he had left in the world. He met her eyes, shaking his head. "We can't." "We can," she cut him off, not as comfort as truth. Her scope found the gunner perched atop the vehicle. One breath, one pull, the rifle cracked, the echo rolling across the valley. The gunner dropped. The enemy below hesitated, not long but enough. The squad roared back, rifles blazing, not just in panic, in defiance. Another shell slammed into the ridge, shaking it to its core. Stones splintered. Men shouted. One went still. The medic crawled to him, but the silence that followed told them all: he was gone. She pressed her forehead against the rifle for half a second, a silent prayer she didn't know the words for. Then she looked up. The battle didn't pause for grief. The corporal shouted over the chaos, voice raw, "What if this is it?" She fired again, another shadow falling. The echo thundered back. "Then we make it matter," she said. The words cut through everything: fear, gunfire, smoke. The men rallied around it, around her. The ridge became fire and fury. Her rifle spoke again and again, each echo rolling courage across broken stone. The private followed her lead, steadier now, his shots sharper. The medic fought with one hand, bandaged with the other. Even the corporal, grizzled and bitter, laughed once, a harsh, defiant bark, as he reloaded into the teeth of death. But the enemy kept coming. Her shoulder throbbed from recoil. Her throat was raw from shouting. Every breath tasted like smoke. But still she rose, shot, dropped, reloaded, rise, shot, drop, again, until she felt her arms go numb. Another blast shook the ridge. The private screamed, falling back. She dragged him behind cover, pressing her palm to his wound. Blood seeped fast, hot against her skin. His eyes locked on hers, wide with fear. "Don't let me," he choked, voice breaking. She gripped his hand tight. "You're not done, not yet." He nodded, fighting tears, fighting the dark pressing in. And when she pulled her hand free, lifted her rifle again, he watched her with something more than fear, with faith. The ridge burned, the enemy surged, and still her rifle cracked, echoing across the valley, each shot a heartbeat, each heartbeat a reminder. She thought of her brother again, waiting on that porch, asking what courage looked like. Maybe he'd never know the details. Maybe history wouldn't write their names. But if anyone asked him years from now, she hoped he'd answer like this. Courage was a rifle's echo across a ridge. The battle stretched into something endless, and then silence again. But this silence was different, not calculation, not waiting, just absence. She blinked through smoke. The valley below was littered with stillness, broken shadows, burning wreckage. The armored beasts were gone, the infantry had pulled back. The ridge held. Her squad sagged against rocks, bloody, broken, alive. Some wept, some laughed hollowly. The medic slumped to his knees, hands red and shaking. The private lay pale but breathing, eyes still on her. She lowered her rifle at last, the weight of it dragging her arms down. For the first time she let herself breathe deep. Not relief, not victory, just breath. The men looked to her again, but not for orders, for something else. Gratitude, recognition. She didn't speak. Words felt too heavy, too fragile. Instead, she sat back, eyes closing, listening to the silence. The kind her father once carried on the porch. The kind that wasn't emptiness but proof they had endured. And in that silence, the truth settled into her bones. Courage doesn't announce itself. It doesn't roar. Sometimes it doesn't even speak. It simply acts. The ridge would never forget her echo, and neither would they.